Good morning. Myself V. Pavan Kumar, working as an assistant professor from CSE AIML department in MLR Institute of Technology. So, in the last class we have discussed about OSI model. So, we have a discussion regarding physical layer, data link layer. Now, we will have a discussion regarding network layer. What is this particular network layer? What is the main use of this particular network layer? And what is the main functionalities of the network layer, and what are the various services provided by the network layer. So, if we recollect the previous session, in the data link layer, the data will be transmitted in the form of frames. So, that particular frames will be converted into packets in this particular network layer. So, the data is represented in the form of packets, right. So, it is responsible to route the packets from source to destination. So, the main aim of this particular network layer is to route the packets. Routing the packets in the sense, you are supposed to follow the path from source to destination. So, say for example, say our college is a destination, and we are supposed to reach to a destination from our house. So, that is a source. So, we will have n number of paths, out of which we are going to select the best path. So, routing in the sense, we are supposed to route the packet from source to destination, right. Next, internetworking means it is also responsible for internetworking. Internetworking means establishing logical connection between different networks. So, here the router is responsible to have a connection between different kinds of network. So, either it might be LAN or MAN or WAN, that is local area network or metropolitan area network or wide area network. So, if you want to establish the communication between different kinds of networks, we use this particular internetworking, and it is also responsible for conversion of physical address to logical address. So, conversion of physical address to logical address in the sense, say for example, how this particular routing process takes place. See, in the data link layer, the data is in the form of frames, right, and these particular frames, and that it also includes some header part, and it includes some bits. So, bits in the sense, we call it as a where we are going to represent the physical layer. So, this is completely a packet, we call it as a packet, or we can call it as a, say for example, this is frames, address, and this is header part. So, how this particular routing takes place? So, the combination of header, address and frames, we call this entire as a packet. So, in data link layer, the data which is in the form of frames is being converted into packets. So, this particular address, what this particular address contains? Address contains source address and destination address. Source address in the sense from where the data is going to be transmitted, destination address in the sense to where the data is to be transmitted, and this particular header part contains bits. This header part contains bits. So, what is the use of this particular bits? So, each and every router is responsible to maintain the routing table. It will maintain some routing table. So, it contains here the index and outgoing link. So, this particular outgoing link in the sense to where you are supposed to transmit that particular data. So, here we are having, so here say for example, incoming means say for example, we have some stations like S1, S2 like that. So, this particular header part contains some information regarding that particular S1. Say for example, if this particular header part contains S1 and if both of them gets matches, so simply that particular data will be forwarded to some router R1. So, the combination of frames, header, address and header is nothing but the packet. So, right. So, this is how the routing process will take place, and it is also responsible for multiple networks will be connected with the help of routers. So, router is responsible to establish the connection between different heterogeneous networks like local area network or wide area network or metropolitan area network. And one more functionality related to this particular network layer is fragmentation. So, what is this particular fragmentation? Fragmentation in the sense the data will be divided into fragments. So, for example, this is a tunnel where the data is to be transmitted, and this is the packet size. So, what happens here, the packet size is very high, this is the packet, and this is the network where you are going to be transmitted. So, what happens in this particular fragmentation is that you are going to divide this particular large packet into smaller packets, which is going to be accommodated in this particular network. So that particular functionality we call it as an fragmentation, right? And what are the services that is going to provided by this particular network layer? Guaranteed delivery. That means here whatever the data that you have been transmitting from the sender, it is 100% sure that the data is going to reach to the receiver without any loss of data, without any modification of the data, without any tampering of the data. And next one is in order packets. What is this particular in order packets? That is nothing but here we are maintaining the sequence number concepts. So what are these particular sequence numbers concept? So for example, here we have a sender and here we have a receiver, right? So sender has to transmit some 10 packets of the data. So for example, sender have transmitted 4 packets of the data, and from the receiver he received only 3 packets of the data. Acknowledgement, we call it as an acknowledgement. So what happens in this particular case? You don't know how many packets have been reached to the receiver correctly and how many number of packets have been acknowledged. So in order to overcome this, in order to overcome the duplication of the packets or the retransmission of the packets, we use this particular in order packets, that we call it as a sequence numbers. So this is about network layer. And coming to this particular transport layer. So in this particular transport layer, the data is being in the form of segments. So whereas in network layer the data has been in the form of packets, whereas in the transport layer it is in the form of segments. It provides logical communication between the applications on different hosts. It is responsible for end-to-end message delivery. So here it is mainly responsible to transmit the data from one host to another host. So for example, this is one host and this is another host. Host is nothing but a sender. This is sender host and the receiver host. So the data will be transmitted end to end, and it provides responsible to provide acknowledgement for successful transmission of the data. So for example, the sender have transmitted one particular data, and whether that particular data have been reached to the receiver or not, it depends upon the acknowledgement transmitted by the receiver. So upon successful transmission of the data, a receiver will send an acknowledgement. That acknowledgement we call it as a positive acknowledgement. So positive acknowledgement will be represented in the form of ACK. So if the data which has been transmitted by the sender is being lost or corrupted during the data transmission, so this is what the corruption. So the packet has not been reached to the receiver. So the sender will expect some kind of acknowledgement from the receiver. What will happen in this particular case? Simply the receiver will send an NAK, negative acknowledgement. Negative acknowledgement in the sense whatever the data that you have been transmitted earlier is not successfully transmitted. So you just again retransmit that particular data frame. That we call it as an acknowledgement. So it provides responsible to provide acknowledgement for successful transmission of the data. It is responsible for retransmission of the data. So what happens? What is an ultimate solution for packet loss? So or data corruption? We are supposed to retransmit that particular data. The only solution is retransmission. And what are the protocols that we are being used in this particular transport layer? Those are TCP and UDP. So what does TCP stands for? TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol. So it is a transmission control protocol. So this particular TCP is a connection oriented protocol. So if you want to establish the communication between the two systems, so connection must be established, then thereafter data transfer must take place, and after that connection termination must be done. For that particular purpose we use this particular TCP protocol. What does UDP stands for? User Datagram Protocol. User Datagram Protocol. So this is the best example for connectionless service. So what are the services? Apart from the functionalities, we have some services like end-to-end delivery, already we have discussed, reliable delivery, reliability in the sense whatever the data that we have been transmitting from the sender to receiver without any modification, without any loss of the data is going to reach to the receiver. Flow control mechanism. So flow control in the sense, so for example, if it does not implement the flow control mechanism, what will happen? Some part of the data will be lost. So the data which has been transmitting in the form of segments will be lost. So flow control mechanism is an important service in this particular transport layer. And connection oriented and connectionless. So connection oriented service is being done with the help of TCP, and connectionless is being done with the help of UDP. These are some of the services with respect to transport layer. Now coming to this particular session layer. So what is this particular session layer? Session layer services. What is the position of the session layer? So session layer is below the application layer. So that is, say for example, application layer, presentation layer. So it is below the presentation layer. Here we are having the session layer, and we are having the transport layer. So what is the position of this particular session layer? It is above the transport layer and below the presentation layer. So what are the functionalities that you are going to discuss or services? Session establishment, maintenance and termination. So if you want to establish the sessions and if you want to maintain that particular session, that means the data transfer should take place, and once the session is being completed, you need to terminate the sessions. That is one of the main services of the or functionalities of the session layer. Next, synchronization. So how we are going to achieve the synchronization with the help of this particular session layer? So for example, this particular synchronization is achieved with the help of this particular checkpoints concept. So for example, you want to transmit 100 pages of data. If you want to transmit 100 pages of the data, say for example, you haven't implemented any checkpoint. So for example, during 65th page, the page have been corrupted. So you don't know, and we don't have any clarity at what point of time the crash have been occurred, and which page has to be retransmitted, or which we need to transmit all the pages. So you don't have any clarity. So by using, so you cannot maintain the synchronization without any implementation of the checkpoints. So what is this particular checkpoints is that, so for example, I am placing checkpoint for every 20 pages. So for every 20 pages we have one checkpoint. So what happens? So if during the data transmission, if the 65th page have been crashed, if the 65th page have been crashed, so what happens? So you need not to concentrate on the first 60 pages of the data. So that means till third checkpoint you don't need to retransmit that particular data, because only the 65th page have been corrupted. That means, so rest of all the pages before the 65th page have been reached successfully. So according to this particular checkpoints, you are supposed to transmit from the fourth checkpoint. So fourth checkpoint indicates, so that means for 3 checkpoints it is happy. So from that fourth checkpoint, in the sense from 61 page to remaining pages. So in this way you are going to maintain the synchronization between the sender and receiver with the help of this particular checkpoints. This is one of the services or functionalities. And the dialog control. So if you want to establish the dialogues between the sender and receiver, so the dialog control plays a major role. So it might be in the form of a half duplex, or it might be in the form of a full duplex. Half duplex in the sense the data transmission will be done in only one direction. So in the previous classes I have already covered about this particular half duplex. If you have any doubts, you can refer that particular videos. So half duplex in the sense the data will be, say for example, here we are having the sender and we are having the receiver. The data will be transmitted in only one direction at a time. So the best example for half duplex is walkie-talkie. Full duplex. So if you want to establish the communication between the sender and receiver with the help of the full duplex, so that means the data will be transmitted in both the direction and at the same time. The best example is telephonic conversation. So this is about session layer. Next, coming to this particular presentation layer. So presentation layer is mainly concerned with syntax and semantics. So what do you mean by syntax and what do you mean by semantics? Syntax means structure or format of a data. Syntax means structure or format of data. What do you mean by semantics? The meaning of this particular syntax is nothing but semantics. So for example, why it is mainly concentrating with respect to this particular syntax and semantics is that, say I will take one example and I'll try to solve it. So for example, hang him not after that I kept comma, leave him. So if you just replace this particular comma and if you place like this, hang him, not leave him. So the entire meaning of that particular sentence is going to be changed. So that is why we are mainly concentrating on the syntax and semantics. So how well you are going to present the data, that is the main importance of the presentation layer, right. Coming to the particular services regarding the presentation layer, one of the main services is translation, right. So either what you need to do is that whenever the data that you are supposed to transmit, that particular data must be translated into the system understandable language. So that is what we call it as a translation. And encryption and decryption, that is a second service. So what is this particular encryption? So encryption means the process of converting plain text to ciphertext is nothing but the encryption. So plain text is nothing but a text in a readable format, and the ciphertext is nothing but a text in a scrambled format. So best example, see, my name is Pavan. So this is the data that you are supposed to transmit. Say for example, this is a plain text. Say for example, this is a confidential information which I am supposed to transmit it to the receiver. So this particular information contains some confidentiality. So to overcome if I send the same information, say for example, leave this particular one, I want to share my password. So for example, I want to share my internet banking password. Say for example, it is Surya. So this is a plain text. With the help of the key, I am going to convert it into ciphertext. Say for example, key is 3. So after S, T, U, V, U after V, W, X, R, R means S, T, U, Y means Z, A, B, A means B, C, D. So this we call it as a ciphertext. This is the ciphertext. So Surya you can pronounce it normally, but whereas what is this particular VXUBD? It is a scrambled text. So where the attacker cannot identify this process. So this particular encryption is done at the sender side. And decryption, the process of converting again ciphertext back to plain text is nothing but decryption. So here as we have done +3 keys, here we will do -3. So he will receive VXUBD. So simply he will use the key -3 and he will retain the plain text back as Surya, right. So this is about encryption and decryption. And coming to this particular compression, so we will be mainly using different kinds of compression techniques to reduce the size of the bits, so such that we will have the much clarity. So we have different compression techniques, compression debox techniques, all these particular techniques will be used, and with the help of that particular techniques you are going to compress the data. So that is compression. And coming to the last application layer, that is functions of application layer. So here that means the data will be transmitted from higher layers to lower layers. For example, if you consider the system 1, the data will flow from application layer to physical layer, and if you consider the system 2, the data will be flowing from lower layer to, that is physical layer, to application layer. So it produces the data and that will be transmitted over a network. And what are the services that is going to provide? File transfer. So here we will be making application layer is responsible for transmission of files, accessing of files and managing the files, email services. So all these, what kind of applications that you have been using for all this transmission, like web browsers, messengers, etc. So this is the overview of entire OSI model. If you have any doubts, please free to ask me in the comment box. Thank you.